The Criminal's Curse. The story begins in a small, sleepy town, nestled in the shadow of dense woods. It was a place where everyone knew each other, but beneath its calm exterior, dark secrets lingered. One such secret was the legend of the Hollow Man, a notorious criminal who, years ago, was said to have terrorized the town with heinous acts of violence. Decades ago, in the 1970s, the town was plagued by a series of brutal murders. The Hollow Man, as the locals called him, was never caught. His crimes were gruesome, and he left behind cryptic symbols drawn in blood at every scene. The murders stopped suddenly, but whispers claimed he had been killed in the woods by an angry mob of villagers. His body was never found, but it was said that his restless spirit roamed the area, seeking revenge on anyone who ventured too close to his territory. Fast forward to today, where a group of 4 friends, Emily, Jake, Tara, and Mike, decided to explore the woods after hearing the legend at a local bar. They were thrill seekers, always looking for a new adventure, and the idea of uncovering the truth about the Hollow Man was too tempting to resist. Armed with flashlights and a camera, they ventured into the dark forest late one evening. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to close in around them, and an unnatural silence filled the air. Suddenly they stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. The door creaked open as if inviting them inside. Against their better judgment, they entered. Inside, the walls were covered with strange symbols, identical to the ones described in the legend. Dust-covered furniture lay scattered, and in the corner they found a diary. The diary belonged to the Hollow Man, and its pages were filled with ramblings about revenge, bloodlust, and an eternal curse placed upon anyone who dared disturb his resting place. As they read, a chilling wind blew through the cabin, extinguishing their flashlights. Panic set in as they heard footsteps outside, though no one else was supposed to be in the woods. The door slammed shut, trapping them inside. One by one, the friends began experiencing horrifying visions. Tara saw a figure with hollow eyes staring at her from the window. Jake felt cold hands grip his shoulders, and Emily heard whispers calling her name. Mike, the skeptic of the group, tried to keep everyone calm, but even he couldn't explain the claw marks that suddenly appeared on the walls around them. Realizing they needed to leave, they forced the door open and ran into the woods. But the forest seemed different now. Every path led them back to the cabin. The symbols from the cabin began appearing on the trees, glowing faintly in the darkness. Desperation took over, and they decided to split up to find an escape. This was their fatal mistake. One by one, they were hunted by a shadowy figure, its hollow eyes gleaming in the dark. Jake was the first to disappear, his screams echoing through the forest. Tara followed, leaving behind only her flashlight. Emily and Mike managed to find each other and stumbled upon an old well. The diary had mentioned the well as the place where the Hollow Man's body was dumped. Believing this was the key to breaking the curse, they decided to confront whatever lay within. As they approached, the shadowy figure emerged, its face a twisted mask of rage and despair. Emily threw the diary into the well, hoping to end the curse, but the figure lunged at her. Mike tried to fight it off, but was thrown into the darkness. The next morning, Emily was found wandering the edge of the woods, muttering incoherently. She was the only survivor, but her mind was shattered. She spoke of the Hollow Man, of his curse, and of the friends she lost. The town sealed off the woods, declaring them forbidden territory. But on quiet nights, locals claimed to hear whispers and footsteps, a reminder that the Hollow Man's curse lives on, waiting for the next victim. The haunting begins. Months had passed since Emily's escape from the woods. She had been placed in a psychiatric facility where she spent her days speaking of visions, whispers, and the hollow-eyed figure that haunted her every waking moment. The townspeople thought she was just another victim of a traumatic experience, but deep down, they knew something more sinister had occurred. They could feel it in the air. The woods were not done with them. One evening, a new family moved into the town. The Winters family, seeking a fresh start after a difficult time in the city. They were unaware of the town's dark history, but soon they would become the next targets. The Winters family consisted of David, his wife Rachel, and their 2 children, Alex and Lily. They were drawn to the town's quaint charm and peaceful surroundings. But it didn't take long for Rachel to notice something was off. The neighbors spoke in hushed tones whenever the woods came up, and the children would often stare into the trees, their faces pale and distant. Alex, the older of the 2, started to have vivid nightmares about a man with hollow eyes. One night, while exploring the outskirts of the woods, Alex and Lily found an old, worn-out book hidden beneath a pile of fallen leaves. The book was eerily familiar. It was the same diary Emily had found in the cabin, the one that detailed the Hollow Man's twisted history. They brought it back to their home, unaware of the consequences. As soon as the book entered the house, things began to change. At first it was small, scratching noises in the walls, doors creaking open on their own. But then, Alex started seeing the figure of the Hollow Man at night, standing in the corner of his room. The whispers began again, just like Emily had described, calling him by name. David and Rachel tried to dismiss their children's fears, chalking it up to an overactive imagination, but the events grew more intense. One evening, Rachel found the book on the floor, its pages opened to a particular passage. "Those who awaken the Hollow Man shall pay the price, and those who disturb his resting place shall be cursed for eternity." Terrified, Rachel did some research and learned of the legend. She tried to burn the book, but it wouldn't catch fire. No matter how much she tried, the flames would die out the moment they touched its pages. As the days went by, the family's behavior grew more erratic. David began losing sleep, haunted by dreams of a dark figure watching him. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing, only to find that something had changed in the house. Objects moved, and strange symbols appeared on the walls. Lily, the youngest, became increasingly withdrawn. She would sit by the window for hours, staring out into the woods with a vacant expression, muttering words that made no sense. Alex, unable to escape the nightmares, became obsessed with finding out more about the Hollow Man. He ventured into the woods alone, convinced that he could end the curse. One stormy night, with the wind howling and the rain pouring down, Alex disappeared. His parents searched the woods frantically, but they found no trace of him. Just as they were about to give up, they heard a faint voice calling from deep within the trees. It was Alex. Rachel and David rushed toward the sound, only to be stopped by an overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew cold, and the trees seemed to close in on them. They saw Alex standing in front of the cabin where Emily and her friends had once ventured. But something was wrong. Alex's eyes were hollow, just like the figure in Emily's vision. "Help me," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "He's coming for you. He's always been here." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet gave way, and they found themselves tumbling into the dark, damp depths of the well that had once been the Hollow Man's resting place. The moment they hit the bottom, they were surrounded by an oppressive darkness. From the shadows, the hollow man emerged, his hollow eyes glowing with an unearthly light. He moved closer, his presence suffocating, and his voice echoed in their minds. "You dared to awaken me. Now you will pay the price." David and Rachel tried to fight, but the figure was too powerful. They could feel the life draining from them, their bodies growing cold as the hollow man's curse took hold. In a final act of desperation, Rachel grabbed the diary and threw it into the well, hoping that the book would be the key to ending it all. But it was too late. The hollow man laughed, his chilling voice reverberating through the well. "You cannot escape your fate." The next morning, the Winters family was gone. No one knew what happened to them, but their house stood abandoned, its windows dark and empty. The book was found in the well, its pages torn and burned, but the curse remained. The new investigator. After the disappearance of the Winters family, the town of Hollow Creek became even more desolate. The streets grew quieter, and the residents began to fear speaking about the past, the legend of the Hollow Man, and the dark events that plagued their town. The townspeople knew the curse had not ended, but no one dared confront it. Then, a new figure arrived in town. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the most perplexing cases, was assigned to investigate the strange disappearances that had been happening in Hollow Creek for years. She was skeptical about the supernatural rumors, but the evidence, disappearances, unexplained deaths, and chilling eyewitness accounts were too much to ignore. Sarah had heard the whispers about the Hollow Man, but she wasn't one to believe in myths. Armed with logic and reason, she arrived at the local sheriff's office to gather information. Sheriff Daniels, a man who had lived in Hollow Creek his whole life, greeted her reluctantly. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he said with a somber look. "There's something wrong with those woods. Something old. Something that can't be explained by your science or investigations." Sarah brushed him off, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. She visited the Winters family's abandoned house first. Inside, everything seemed undisturbed, except for the strange symbols carved into the walls. Sarah examined the markings closely, noting their resemblance to the symbols in the legend of the Hollow Man. Determined to understand the connection, Sarah dug deeper into the town's history. She visited the local library and sifted through dusty old books and newspapers. It didn't take long before she found the name of the original criminal, Victor Holloway. Holloway had been a notorious figure in the town's history, known for his gruesome murders, his strange obsession with the occult, and his mysterious disappearance. His trial had been abandoned when the evidence mysteriously vanished, and soon after, the town's horror began. One night, while going through the archives, Sarah found a reference to a diary, similar to the one Alex and the Winters family had found. It was rumored to be in the possession of a former local historian, now deceased. Sarah paid a visit to the historian's old house, and after some searching, uncovered the fabled diary. The moment she opened the first page, a cold chill ran down her spine. The handwriting was disturbingly familiar, identical to the one Emily had described. The same cryptic symbols, the same warnings. The curse had not only haunted the people of Hollow Creek, but it had also cursed anyone who dared learn too much. The more Sarah read, the more she began to feel a creeping dread. The diary described how Victor Holloway had made a pact with a dark entity, a spirit of vengeance to gain power and immortality in exchange for his soul. The spirit, however, had a price. Every soul that came into contact with Holloway's remains would fall victim to the curse. The curse was eternal, passed from one person to the next, always feeding on fear and despair. As Sarah read on, she discovered that the spirit of the Hollow Man was not just a haunting apparition. It was an ancient entity that could possess the living. It had been searching for a new host for years, waiting for the right moment to break free from the confines of the woods. And it had found that host in Alex Winters. With this new knowledge, Sarah knew that the only way to stop the curse was to confront the Hollow Man's remains and destroy them. But the task was not as simple as it seemed. The diary hinted that there was one final ritual needed to put the spirit to rest, one that required the blood of the innocent and the willing sacrifice of the one who had uncovered the truth. Determined to end the nightmare once and for all, Sarah ventured into the woods alone, following the instructions in the diary. She reached the same cabin where Emily and the others had first encountered the Hollow Man. The atmosphere was thick with dread, and the trees seemed to whisper in the wind. The air grew colder, and Sarah could feel the presence of something watching her. As she approached the cabin, the door creaked open, and the figure of the Hollow Man materialized before her. His hollow eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his voice echoed in her mind. "You cannot stop me. You have awakened me, and now you will pay." Sarah tried to summon the courage to fight back, but the Hollow Man's power was overwhelming. He was no longer just a ghost. He had become something much more dangerous, a force of pure malevolence. His presence filled the cabin, pressing down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, Sarah remembered the final part of the ritual. She needed to destroy the diary, the one thing that held the spirit's power. But the Hollow Man was too quick. Before she could act, he lunged at her, his hands cold and clammy as they wrapped around her throat. In her final moments, Sarah grabbed the diary, her fingers trembling as she tore it apart, ripping the pages from the binding. The moment the last page was shredded, a deafening scream echoed through the woods, and the Hollow Man's form began to dissipate into the wind. The next morning, Sarah's body was found at the edge of the woods, her face frozen in a look of terror. The diary was gone, but the curse had not been broken. The town of Hollow Creek remained under the shadow of the Hollow Man's legacy, and the woods were still forbidden. The whispers never stopped, and the residents of the town knew that one day the Hollow Man would return again, hungry for more souls. And somewhere, deep in the woods, a hollow-eyed figure waited, biding its time until the next unwitting soul ventured too close to the darkness. Weeks had passed since Sarah Mitchell's tragic end, and Hollow Creek remained a town marked by fear. The residents were on edge, knowing that the Hollow Man's curse was still alive, lingering in the air. Despite the detectives' efforts to stop it, something had shifted, an unease that grew stronger with each passing day. But as the townspeople hid behind locked doors and whispered in hushed tones, a new presence had arrived. A mysterious man, claiming to be a paranormal investigator, showed up at the sheriff's office. His name was Ethan Cole, a well-known figure in the field of occult research. Ethan had heard about the Hollow Man from old case files and rumors, and he believed that the curse could be lifted once and for all if they were willing to take the risk. Sheriff Daniels, though wary, reluctantly agreed to work with Ethan. The sheriff had seen too much, and after Sarah's death, he knew they couldn't keep pretending that nothing was wrong. The time had come to face the truth head on. Ethan spent days researching the Hollow Man's curse, combing through the same records that Sarah had uncovered. He found that the Hollow Man was not merely a ghost, but a manifestation of pure malevolent energy. The entity had been feeding off the fear of generations, growing stronger with each life it took. Ethan discovered that there was only one way to permanently end the curse: by severing the connection between the Hollow Man and the land itself. But the ritual to do so was dangerous. It required a blood sacrifice not from the innocent, but from someone who had already been touched by the Hollow Man's curse, someone who had encountered his dark influence. And Ethan believed that person was still alive. Ethan's research led him to Emily, the lone survivor of the first group of friends who had ventured into the woods years ago. Emily had never truly escaped the Hollow Man's grasp. The entity had left a part of itself within her, and now it was time for her to face the final battle. Ethan and Sheriff Daniels tracked her down to a small, isolated cabin where she had been living in seclusion, haunted by her past. She had never spoken to anyone about what had happened in the woods, but deep down, she knew that the Hollow Man's curse had not left her. It had simply been lying in wait. When Emily learned that the Hollow Man was still alive and that the town was at risk, she knew she had no choice but to return to the place where it all began. She could no longer hide from the darkness that had consumed her life for so long. On a stormy night, with the wind howling and the trees groaning under the weight of the rain, Emily, Ethan, and Sheriff Daniels made their way into the heart of the woods. They followed the same path that Emily and her friends had taken all those years ago. As they approached the old cabin, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around them. The Hollow Man was waiting. His hollow eyes gleamed from the shadows, and his voice echoed in their minds. "You cannot escape me. I am eternal. You are nothing but prey." Emily felt the familiar dread settle over her, but this time she was ready. The diary, which had once been her undoing, was now the key to their salvation. Ethan had learned that in order to sever the curse, they needed to destroy the Hollow Man's physical remains, the very source of his power. As they entered the cabin, the figure of the Hollow Man appeared before them, his body shifting and twisting, becoming something monstrous and inhuman. His face, hollow and empty, was a reflection of the pain and suffering he had caused. Ethan held up the ritual knife, a blade forged from silver and etched with ancient symbols. He knew that only through sacrifice could they break the curse, but the price would be steep. Emily was the key. She had to willingly offer herself to the Hollow Man's power in order to destroy him. Emily stepped forward, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She had spent years running from this moment, but now she understood. The Hollow Man had never truly left her. His presence had always been with her, waiting for the right time to claim her soul. With a final glance at Ethan and Sheriff Daniels, Emily plunged the ritual knife into her own chest, offering herself as the ultimate sacrifice. The Hollow Man screamed, his form beginning to disintegrate as the power of the ritual took hold. The walls of the cabin trembled, and the very ground beneath them seemed to crack open. The Hollow Man's hollow eyes widened in disbelief as his form shattered into thousands of pieces, his essence being torn apart by the ritual. The darkness that had plagued the town for so long began to dissipate, and the oppressive air lifted. But as Emily collapsed to the ground, her body limp and lifeless, the curse was finally broken. The Hollow Man was gone. The town of Hollow Creek slowly began to recover from the horrors that had plagued it for generations. The woods, once a place of fear and death, began to show signs of life again. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, seemed to stand tall once more. The people of Hollow Creek could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the nightmare had ended. Sheriff Daniels and Ethan returned to the sheriff's office. both men exhausted from the ordeal. They had lost a brave soul in Emily, but her sacrifice had saved them all. As the days passed, they knew that the town would never forget the horrors it had endured, but it was time to move forward. And as for the Hollow Man, his legacy was sealed. The darkness he had created was gone, but his story would live on in the whispers of those who had survived. The Hollow Man was no more, but in the quiet corners of Hollow Creek, his name would never be forgotten.